Welcome to The Critique. Today we're looking at a submission that argues straight white men are uniquely marginalized in entertainment.
Yeah, and it's built on some really potent stuff. Employment statistics, personal stories from inside Hollywood, and a cultural critique of shows like Stranger Things.
The material is strong, I agree. The personal accounts are incredibly compelling. But I think there are a few key opportunities to really maximize the thesis and make sure it lands with the force it deserves.
Absolutely. You have these staggering numbers, white male writers dropping from almost half the workforce to under 12%.
Right.
And when you pair that with the stories he tells, you've got the foundation for an undeniable argument. So I think our first job is making sure the structure doesn't get in its own way.
Let's dive right in there, because it's the first thing that jumped out at me. The inclusion of extensive commercial sponsorship right at the climax of the personal narrative, it critically compromises the emotional impact and the structural integrity of the piece.
Oh, completely. The author builds this incredible emotional momentum. He shares two really powerful anecdotes back to back.
The rejection from the George Lopez show PA Job.
Right, where there was an explicit policy against hiring white men. And then the story about the ABC Disney writing program, where his script gets all this praises, but he's basically told the door's closed to him.
These are just gut punches. You feel the frustration, the systemic nature of it.
And then that momentum is just completely flattened.
Yeah.
It just stops for a very long, very detailed product promotion for the cc.dev app. I mean, it's not a quick mention.
Not at all. He gets into iOS and Android functionality, Stripe integration, all the technical details.
And it creates this massive signal clash. You've just made the listener lean in, right? To feel the sting of that exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just slam on the brakes for this mechanical pitch. It really diminishes the weight of the next story, which is just as powerful.
The one about the agent and the director friend.
Exactly. It unintentionally signals that this profound personal struggle is somehow secondary to the commercial break.
So the fix here, and I think it's a necessary one, is to relocate that advertising segment entirely. The personal narrative, the PA job, the script, the agent, the director, that whole sequence needs to be cohesive. It has to be an uninterrupted arc.
They're the strongest parts of the whole piece. They have to be allowed to breathe.
Okay, so let's give a couple of concrete options. Option A, you could place the ad immediately after the statistical section.
Oh, I like that.
Right? You lay out the data, the drop from 48% to 11.9%, and you use those cold, hard numbers as a natural pivot point.
A logical break.
Exactly. You prime the listener with the data, and then you dive into the personal stories that really illustrate what those numbers mean in human terms. The whole emotional arc stays intact.
That's clean. But what if the ad, for some reason, has to stay near the middle?
Then option B would be to dramatically shorten it in the main body.
Just a quick mention?
A brief, punchy mention of the company and what it does, and that's it. Then you move all that detailed mechanical stuff that talk about integrations and functionality to a segment after the conclusion.
A post-roll.
Right. Protect the narrative flow. That has to be the number one priority here.
I think that's absolutely the right call. The emotional arc has to come first.
Okay, so that handles the flow. Let's pivot now to the substance, to the argument itself. We've talked about the emotional impact. Now let's talk about the intellectual focus.
Right, because right now it feels like it's juggling two very big ideas. And maybe we need to help decide which one is the true center.
Yes, the material needs to rigorously unify its two major critiques, the decline of artistic quality and the statistical evidence of employment discrimination, under one single sharp argument.
As it is now, it kind of shifts back and forth. On one hand, you get this cultural critique.
The Stranger Things analysis.
Exactly. Criticizing season 5's creative choices, straining the suspension of belief with the young girl leading a military operation, that kind of thing.
And then on the other hand, you have this very potent socioeconomic critique, the hard data on writers, the Harvard faculty numbers, the personal hiring stories.
And by treating both of them as sort of equally weighted problems that stem from this generalized woke mind virus, the author loses the chance to build a really focused, sophisticated case for either one. The argument gets a bit diffuse.
I also think the very aggressive claim that straight white men are the only truly marginalized group that needs deep, specific institutional support to land. The artistic critique, while interesting, can feel like a bit of a distraction from the much harder evidence of, job market exclusion.
So the solution is really about focus. Choose one primary lens, either the institutional climate or the degradation of art, and then make the other one subordinate to it.
Exact. If the main point is exclusion, then the artistic decline should be presented as a consequence of that exclusion.
And if the main point is the art,
Then the statistic should be used to explain why better content isn't getting made.
okay, that's a really clean framework. So let's walk through option A, focusing on the institutional climate.
Right. So when discussing the Duffer Brothers and Stranger Things, you'd shift the focus away from just criticizing specific creative choices.
So less about this plot point is bad and more about
Analyzing the powerful structural incentives in Hollywood that lead to those choices. You could frame the show's content shifts not as just artistic failure, but as a mechanism for survival, for conformity.
I see. So you're directly linking the creator's choices to the statistical reality, showing the immense pressure that even successful straight white men are under.
Precisely. It demonstrates that the institutional rules of everyone, even those at the very top, it makes the problem systemic, not just individual.
Okay. And then option B would be to lean into the artistic quality argument.
Right. If that's the priority, then you dedicate a section to explaining why Hollywood trying to guess what conservatives want, with shows like Yellowstone or Jack Reacher, why that so often fails to create truly legendary content.
Because they're missing an essential perspective.
They are. And then you bring in the exclusion data as the knockout punch.
So the story about the pilot script that was called unbelievably good, but got blocked by DEI.
That becomes your definitive proof. It shows that the very talent needed to elevate the art is being systematically sidelined before it can even get in the door. The institutional problem becomes the reason for the artistic decay.
That creates a really clean, powerful, unified structure. I like that a lot.
Okay, our final critique is about how the material uses its evidence. The tone, the rhetoric, the anecdotes themselves are devastating. A director being told he should identify as queer to get a job.
Or the explicit policy at the George Lopez show. It's incredibly specific.
It is, but we need to make sure that devastating specificity doesn't get lost in overly broad generalizations.
I see what you're saying. While the anecdotal evidence is highly compelling, the overall persuasiveness would be strengthened by, maybe softening some of the sweeping binary language.
You've got this concrete, undeniable evidence of employment discrimination. You can't really argue with an agent saying she can hire black women tomorrow, but it's tough for white men. That's a direct claim about how the system works.
But then those claims get punctuated by these really emotionally charged, aggressive labels.
DEI hires to a wild animal or illegal alien.
And look, that rhetoric clearly comes from a place of genuine and frankly justified frustration.
Absolutely.
But it risks alienating readers who might otherwise be sympathetic to the core issue. The force of the anger starts to drown out the force of the evidence. It makes the piece easier for critics to dismiss based on tone alone.
So the suggestion here is to anchor those strong emotional responses more firmly in the data and the policy analysis.
Like the Jacob Savage stats he brings up.
Or the Harvard Business Plan from Chris Rufo. Frame the anecdotes as case studies of systemic policy failure, not just evidence of widespread individual malice. It shifts the discussion from who is to blame to what mechanisms are broken.
Let's make that concrete. Instead of labeling George Lopez a total racist over the hiring policy,
You use that shocking story as your central proof point. You use it to discuss the specific dangers of these zero-sum DEI hiring goals when they translate into explicit race-based exclusion for qualified people.
that immediately elevates the critique from a personal attack to a much sharper policy analysis.
It does. It makes it about the institution, which is a much harder argument to refute.
And it preserves the author's credibility as an analyst, not just a victim.
Exactly. And same thing when discussing the woke Hollywood rejects fearing extinction. You can temper that rhetoric by pivoting to a focused policy question.
So instead of the generalization, you ask something more specific.
Right. You say, okay, if talent is proven, like with that writer whose script was unbelievably good, what specific oversight should be implemented at networks like ABC and Disney?
How do you ensure that programs designed for marginalized groups don't become vehicles for reverse discrimination?
Yes. How do you stop them from sidelining immense talent in the name of rigid quotas? By asking that question, you're leveraging the author's insider knowledge. You're turning justified outrage into actionable, robust analysis.
And that makes the whole critique much more difficult for anyone to ignore.
Okay, I think this has been a really compelling look at a very strong piece of material. To recap, we focused on 3 key areas for improvement.
First, fix the structural flow. That detailed ad needs to move out of the emotional climax of the story.
Right. Protect the personal anecdotes. Present them as one uninterrupted sequence.
Second, sharpen the central focus. You have to decide if the primary argument is about artistic decline or institutional exclusion. Make one clearly serve the other to create a single, unified thesis.
And third, maximize the intellectual rigor by dialing back some of the sweeping generalizations.
Anchor the emotion in the policy. Use those powerful anecdotes as case studies of a systemic breakdown, not just individual attacks.
The raw power of the content you submitted is genuinely impressive. If you implement these suggestions, I think you'll create an argument that is substantially harder for any audience to dismiss.
We strongly encourage you to make these changes and submit the revised material back to us. We would be thrilled to take another look at the next draft.